So in this lesson, we're going to look at the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was an incredibly important event in 20th century history. You'll see in our course it has a bearing on judging whether the Treaty of Versailles was fair or not, and it also has a huge bearing on the rest of the course that we're going to study on 20th century world history. So the Russian Revolution, an incredibly important event. So the gentleman you can see in the picture here is Tsar Nicholas II of the Imperial Romanov dynasty. Tsar Nicholas II was the ruler of Russia, and he was the ruler of Russia. He was the absolute monarch. He was something that we call an autocrat. He had real and genuine power, unlike, for example, the constitutional monarchy of Great Britain, where the monarch was a figurehead and didn't really have much power. They're just a symbol. In Russia at the time, Tsar Nicholas II had absolute power. He wasn't that popular though. And here's a few reasons. In 1905, Russia lost a war with Japan, and Tsar Nicholas's popularity in Russia declined even further. So he'd lost a war with Japan, his popularity declined. Furthermore, there was a huge gap in Russia between the rich and the poor. The vast majority of Russians were poor peasants, although there was, in the cities, a growing middle class and a growing working class working in the factories. And a lot of people wanted more political power. In 1905, there was actually an attempted revolution. Now, the armies of the Tsar did put down the revolution, but Tsar Nicholas II realised he had to do something. He had to show the people of Russia that he was offering them some political power. So he established the Russian parliament called the Duma. However, shortly after establishing it, Tsar Nicholas II, he didn't really like the parliament that he established. It had little real power and he didn't really listen to it. Come 1914 and Russia enters World War I on the side of Britain and France. Well, the war went very, very badly for Russia and caused further huge declines in Tsar Nicholas's popularity. He actually himself supervised a lot of the military campaign and didn't do a good job. The war went very badly for Russia. The time was ripe for another revolution. Well, in 1917 there were actually two revolutions. The first of these revolutions was in February of 1917, and the Tsar was deposed. What followed next is a little bit confusing. Judging who's in power is not easy. It was a period called the period of dual power. Well, the old Duma transformed into the provisional government. Provisional means temporary. So it's a provisional government before they can set up something later, hopefully more democratic. But as well as the provisional government, something called the Soviets had taken part in the revolution as well. Now, the Soviets were groups of workers' councils. And if you've ever wondered where the word Soviet comes from, this is what it means. The Soviets were workers' councils. The leader of the party associated with the Soviets, the Bolshevik Party, a communist party, was Vladimir Lenin. The provisional government continued, however, the unpopular war. Very unpopular war. The provisional government carried on prosecuting this unpopular war. And consequently, when the October Revolution took place, this is when the Bolsheviks seized power, so they kicked out the provisional government, and the Bolshevik Party, the Communist Party, took power. Around about that time, Lenin had a lot of effective slogans: all power to the Soviets, peace, land and bread, messages which struck a chord with the Russian people, so there wasn't much opposition to the October Revolution. So the Bolsheviks took power in October, the first communist state in the world. Soviet Russia was born in October of 1917. Next, the new Soviet government had to do something about the war, which was still going on. The gentleman you can see in the middle of this picture is Trotsky. Now, Trotsky, the Soviet representative of the new communist government of Russia, met with the German military leadership and signed a treaty. This was the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Now, this treaty is quite important, again later when we're judging the fairness of the Treaty of Versailles, Because what happened in the treaty is the Germans took a huge amount of Russian land. You can see in this picture, huge areas of Russia were taken from Soviet Russia for Germany. So it was a very harsh treaty against Russia. You might wonder why Lenin actually signed this treaty. Well, there are a couple of reasons, really. One reason was that the Soviet government had to deal with counter-revolutionaries, so they had to worry about dealing with people who were against their October Revolution, the Soviet Revolution. The other reason was that their army was in no state to fight. They'd just formed the Red Army, it was in no state to fight the Germans. So a couple of reasons there why Lenin signed this treaty, but bear in mind, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, a harsh treaty against Soviet Russia, where they lose a large amount of land. Next in Russia, there was a period of civil war, the communist Reds versus the Whites. The Whites were a group of different groups, actually, all of whom were against the Soviet government. What happened? There was a vicious civil war between 1917, the last conflict ending in 1923. On the left here, you can see a white propaganda poster. The noble white figure, the knight there, is trying to trample on the evil Soviet Bolshevik dragon. On the right here, you can see a bit of communist propaganda with the unlikely-looking figure of Trotsky there, with his little beard and spectacles, sat upon a Soviet horse, and he is killing the evil capitalist serpent there. The Red Army did eventually win the war. They were more united. Trotsky turned out to be a ruthless but very effective military leader. One of the things that was done was that machine guns were mounted behind Red Army troops, so if they were to retreat, they'd be shot by their own men. Something of a motivation to approach the enemy. There were a lot of deaths and casualties. There are lots of estimates as to those. But the Red Army was eventually triumphant. Now, something again here which is going to play a part when later in the history course we look at the Cold War. The White Army, the anti-Bolshevik, the anti-communist, they were actually helped by troops dispatched from Britain, the USA, France, Poland and Japan. Here you can see a piece of communist propaganda with the evil-looking top-hatted Uncle Sam figure of the United States and these capitalist dogs of the various nations unleashed against the noble Bolshevik cause. So the White Army was helped by the Western powers. Well, why was that? There was a great fear in the Western democracies of the spread of communism. A lot, especially in Europe, of the democracies were very poor. There was a lot of chaos and confusion after the war. They were afraid of communist revolutions within their own countries. And something else that Lenin set up in 1919 is this word here. Lenin set up the Comintern, or Communist International. Now, the aim of Comintern, of the Communist International, was to create world revolution, or help to foster a world revolution. Lenin believed that sooner or later there would be a communist revolution, would sweep through the whole world, and those capitalist democracies would fall, and there'd be a rise of international communism. So that's why he set up Comintern. And as you can imagine, the Western democracies saw this as a huge threat. They saw communism as a threat to themselves. So there you go, in a nutshell, the main points of the Russian Revolution.